Ruben, thank you so much for agreeing to be interviewed. And can we start by you telling us your full name, please?
My name is Ruben Castilla Herrera.
Okay. And where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in a small town called Seguin, Texas, which is between San Antonio and Austin. And I lived there only the first 6-7 years of my life. And then we became migrant farm workers, and we went to California and as a child and picked lettuce and grapes, and then went to Oregon and picked berries and different fruits and vegetables, and then Yakima Valley in eastern Washington, and picked red and golden delicious apples. So vegetables and fruit and working the dirt is very real to me as a child. But we settled in Oregon, a small town in Oregon, and I ended up staying there and graduating from high school and eventually went to college.
Okay. When did you move here to Ohio?
To Ohio, I came in 1987. 87 in like May of 87.
What was your, I mean, it sounds like you moved around a lot when you were young. So what was your childhood like?
Well, my mother died when I was 4. And so I didn't know my mother. So that's a big part of my question in my life, and a big part of, I think, who I am. I think of my mother every day. And so I think part of my consciousness of justice issues is based upon that, and I really can't explain it, but and specifically in the women's issues and families and women as the giver of life. Wow, I mean that's for me as a man. I can't even imagine that, right? And so that's very close to who I am, and I came from a family of 10. We were migrant farm workers. I was the second to the youngest, and also my dad was a musician. He was a musico, and so he also had a band. And so for some reason I was gifted in that I was a good producer. I was a fast laborer, and so in our family that meant more income, right? Because we were child laborers, and so my value in my family went up. And I tell people, and I'm not sure this is exactly true, but maybe is I think that I was even fed better than my siblings that weren't as fast pickers. And I remember my brother Richard in particular, just older than me. He would sit in the field and just look and like and talk about the sky. He was an artist, right? And we thought he was strange, but because my dad only thought he should be picking, right? But his brain was different, and he was more creative, and Richard was treated differently than I was. And so not only that, but I was a musician too. I learned how to play drums, and my value went up as well, because that brought income to the family. And so consequently that helped me learn how to speak English better. And then through the assimilation as a migrant farm worker, we were Mexicans, right? My parents are Americans, but we were the Mexicans, right? And so we faced discrimination all the time. And so I found myself, once I learned how to speak English and I was rewarded by the system, by the schools or whatever the system was, it made me feel better as a child, right? And that's part of development. But I realized that I was assimilating, and so I learned how to articulate and enunciate, and I wasn't Ruben, I was Ruben, right? Even how I was called, and I did well in school, and I was a good one. Everybody wanted, why can't all the Mexicans be like Ruben? And that made me feel good, right? And it wasn't till after high school I realized what was happening, and it was kind of the tail end of the Chicano movement in the West, and I was involved, or my brothers were involved in this college that they were trying to start called the Colegio Cesar Chavez. It was a college without walls in Oregon. They're trying to take this building from HUD and have it given to these group of educators, a small group. And we actually fought and marched for it, and it was finally given to us. At those times, that's what we did. We sat in. We would occupy, basically. I mean, we've always been occupying for a long time as a way of organizing and demonstrating and getting back. We occupied the place, and finally it was given back. And so that my consciousness as a Chicano at the time, I started realizing who I was, and I started coming back to who I was. And really, it was always there, right? I didn't assimilate my skin color. and I was always Ruben Herrera, and I always walked back to the low income housing that we lived in, and so I never really went away. But that experience, I guess it's just mine, right? And it's not good or bad. It just is, and I accept it as part of my development. And that too is also the base of kind of my passion and compassion for people and for justice, and because I know that that's kind of thing still happening today, differently, right, with immigrants or refugees or the gay community or whoever that might be, and so it really has impacted me. So, but I came here actually. I was married. I was a migrant farm worker, and we did what we always did, and so I ended up having a child at a very young age. I was like 16, right out of high school, and then our parents kind of forced me and the mother of our child to come together. Really didn't even know each other, and then the next thing you knew, we had another child, and then another, right? And so we were very young parents, and that was not so uncommon at all. And so I got a job. When I was in high school, I was a straight A student. I was in National Honor Society, but none of the I was never on the track for college. I didn't know. None of the counselors said, you need to go to school, or this is what you need to know, and I was not on that track. As Mexicans and Latinos and Chicanos there, we weren't. What they did for us is they got us jobs. So when I was a senior, I had a half-time job with the Oregon's Highway Department, and when I graduated, I was set. I had a upward mobility, right, from the fields to now a job with the Highway Department and some benefits, and so I was set. And I worked for them for probably 7 or 8 years, and then I realized that I had reached kind of my potential. I just felt like I could do more, and I started taking an English class at a community college because I felt that that's what I wanted to do. And then I did well, and it kind of sparked that back in me. And then I took another class, and then I found that that's where I needed to be. And at the time I had 3 children, and a friend of mine, older woman, she said, you need to go to college. And not only that, she said, but I'm going to help you get there. And so that's what happened. I went to what was a private university, Willamette University in Salem, and it was a very elite school in Oregon, and then once again I was kind of thrown back into a world that I didn't even know. And the interesting thing, it was really in my neighborhood. I lived probably 8 blocks from there. I never really realized it was there. And so, but now it was an insight. And my first year was very difficult because it was a small private school, very Greek, very middle upper class, and I was 24, 25 with 3 children, and probably one of the few Latinos there. There's a handful.
Did they know what to do with you?
They didn't know. They didn't know what to do, and I didn't know. And actually, and then it became a lonely space because I started learning, and then there was no one to share that with when I went back home with my family, right? And my family were all very proud of me, but they never told me really. They would brag about me in their own spaces, but not to me. I wouldn't get that reinforcement from them, so it was very lonely. And I remember going up. There's a chapel. And it was in a tall, older building, and I used to go out there and cry, because that was how I handled that experience. It was very lonely. But then again, out of that comes something, right? Connection, and then I started getting involved and learning more about some of the things that were happening in my own life. And one of the great things that happened was I remember seeing Cesar Chavez when I was a child in Oregon, in California, in the fields. I didn't know who he was then, but I was able to reconnect with him when I was at Willamette University, and he met with a small group of people for about a half a day. And then it kind of took that kind of experience, it took me back to kind of who I was and some of the work that I needed to be doing. And so that's probably one of the highlights of my undergrad. But it was a good experience overall. And then I decided that I was going to go to seminary. It was that's a kind of a whole another ongoing story. But as it turned out, I was a single parent by then because my wife at the time, we tried very hard to make it work, but it was just difficult. It was just challenging, she ended up leaving and leaving me with the children, and I knew I was going to go to seminary, and so I thought that wasn't going to happen. But I ended up coming to Ohio because where I went to Methodist Theological School, they had housing for families, and it was a community, and I came. And I didn't know any. I came with $500 in my pocket and three children. Yeah. And I went to school there and finished there, and that was in '87. It was lonely. It was again. You know, I think we as Latinos in Ohio, wherever we are, we come into these spaces, and even though we are prepared because we're, you know, educated or we have these stories, we're oftentimes we're just thrown back into the question of who am I and why am I here, right? And so hopefully you grow, right, and you start finding community. So when I came here, it was like I'd never been to Ohio before, and I was
what
like,
city
wow.
were you in?
It was in Salem, Oregon, which is just
here.
Oh, here. Oh, I came to Delaware, which is just north from here, north there. But I would come to Columbus, and I would look for sounds or smells or sounds or language, right, that I could identify with, mostly Spanish, right, and it was hard to find, and Columbus was a much bigger city than I had moved out of, and so, but we found each other, we did find each other, and we organized, right, and because of my experience as a migrant farm worker, I was an organizer. I was the interpreter for my family, and so there was a little bit of power with that, because sometimes I would interpret the story where I thought my dad would take it better, right? Or beneficial to us, to me sometimes, right? And so there was power in that, but we find each other, and there was a group of people that we met with. Some in Ohio, some here in Ohio State. There was a coffee shop we'd go meet. I would meet with some of the professors here that I got to know, a Puerto Rican guy, and this other man who actually his family is from Oregon. That I realized he was here. Dr. Roberto Villa, who recently retired from here, was here also, and so we would meet and just to be with each other. And then we met people in the community, and we started an organization, the Hispanic Alliance of Ohio, and I became the secretary and treasurer, and we would meet. It was mostly social, but most of the time it was just to be together.
Is that organization still? It's
not, but many of the people, some have passed, some people are still around, and some have moved on. But it's not, every once in a while I get mail from them in their name that's forwarded to me. It's always, it's really interesting to get that. But the interesting thing was something that brought us together, and it was probably '88 or so. There was a live broadcast on Channel 4 NBC station, and they were gonna, as their tease for the news, it's something like live at 5, immigration raid, way back. That was in '88, '89. So they were in collusion with the INS at the time, immigration, and this TV station, and they were going to do this live raid on the west side, and so. So we heard about that, and we confronted the TV station. It was a big thing then, and that was kind of the first thing that we did that I remember way back in, I think it was '88.
Wow, '88, yeah. You mentioned a couple of things that even though it was maybe 2-3 decades ago, some of the struggles that you went through are still happening now. For example, you mentioned how as a young Latino, you were not seen by your counselors as college material. They didn't prepare you for that. They got you jobs. What has been your experience? I mean, I hear stories about that still happening now here in Ohio or in other places. What is your experience with that?
Well, I think that for Latinos and Latinas that are born here, that are residents, still, I mean, we still don't have a high rate of going on to higher education, and so that's still an issue within us. When are we how is education going to be valued in the household, formal education, in order to make that possible to go. And so I'm not quite sure that we're quite there still. But we're much better than when I was a child also. So that's kind of in the mainstream culture. In the immigrant community, it's interesting because, and we all know these stories because people who have come here to work and have this work value and care about their family and their children and actually would want them to get educated, right? But they also know that they may be undocumented or they're here illegally. And so it's not within the range of possibility. So that somewhat has changed in the sense that the young people themselves, change has got to emerge in order to be resilient and sustainable. It has to emerge from the struggle and from the people that are struggling. I can do what I can to help, but when it becomes real to the people, whether they're women or young people or dreamers, then that's when things happen. That's exactly what happened with the DREAM Act. I think that dreamers across the country and here as well said, I should. Why can't I go to school? And there's a young woman, Maria Sanchez, who I would love to refer. I don't know if you met her yet. Have you met her?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
She called us at our office. Crying, and she barely spoke English, trying to get it to Columbus State, and we worked with her, and then she became an activist herself, and through her story. And I remember, maybe she told you, she said something like, she said they literally turned her down and said, no, you're undocumented, you're illegal, you can't go to school here. And she says that she left and she cried, and she also said, I'm not gonna. That's the last time I'm gonna cry for that reason. And that's the emerging power of the person. Yeah. She was just recently admitted to Ohio State. I just saw her Buck ID card, and so that's an issue within our community for immigrants, and so that's slowly changing as well. You know, there's always finances and those kind of issues in big institutions that it's hard to make it happen, but it is changing slowly. but we still have a lot of work to do in that regard.
So you said you came here in '87. What are your first memories of Ohio, and sort of I know you have a history of sort of organizing, but maybe if you can talk about how it has taken you to where you are now.
My first memory was I think I moved here on a day like today. It was hot and humid, and it seemed like every day was like that. It was I never experienced humidity like that ever, and then there was a tornado watch. It's like what, and so it was just environmentally it was a whole different change for me. The other is trying to find spaces and places that I felt I could be a Latino at, right? Language, and even restaurants, right? I would look for a restaurant, and I remember with my children driving around and finding nothing, and we ended up going to, it's shamefully like a Taco Bell, Hudson and High. It's still there. It's kind of like a landmark for me, and so sometimes I share that story because sometimes that's what you have to do, right? And so it was very difficult at that time. But we started, and I'm not sure exactly what you want from this question, but we started meeting other people slowly, and I realized that the Catholic Church was interesting, even though I wasn't really raised Catholic. I was baptized Catholic, but I had become United Methodist, and I realized that the church was that place. We talked about that earlier, and there was Santa Cruz at the time was downtown, and that became a space where I knew I could see people in numbers. And so I would go to the Catholic Church just to be in that space because there were many Mexicanos or Hispanos there at the time, and that was really the reason I would go and take my children. It wasn't so much of a spiritual thing. And they would eat afterwards because we would eat, right? That's another big thing is coming together to eat. But things started changing, and I would say when a lot of the immigrants started coming here maybe 10 or 15 years ago in number, and coming on the west side, we started seeing like small stores opening, mercados, and then restaurants, but mostly stores. And so that became, that for me became, it still is kind of a gathering place for me to go and just to be around the fruits and vegetables sometimes that are, you don't see anywhere else. Or, and so that has changed. But something that happened that really changed my consciousness as Ohioan, and I say Ohioan, I'm not born here, but I feel this is where I'm from now, is that about, I think 11 or 12 years ago, there was a fire on the west side. And I don't know if you heard about this. And it was, I heard in the news, it was Sunday morning, and 5 people were killed. No, 9 people were killed. A family of 5, mother, father, and 3 children, and then some other people that were staying in. And they were they were Latino immigrants. And I saw it in the news, and I decided that I'm going to go there to see what I could do and volunteer. And so I went. There were departments off of Georgesville Road, Lincoln Park. And I get there and it's chaos, and there's fire trucks and the smell of charcoal and the Red Cross, and there's a bus there housing people, and it's just a mess. And it's people that are in trauma, and I went to the Red Cross, and I was probably one of the first Latinos to go there, and I said, what can I do? How can I help? And thinking that they probably needed interpreters, but what they told me surprised me. They said that they're asking, people want clergy, because and it reminded me that in situations like that, we go back to our spirituality, however we define that, right? And so that's what they were asking for. And so we had just developed this book of resources, businesses and churches, and I just happened to have it with me, and so I went down to listen and call people, and that was the first thing that I did. But I ended up staying there for about two weeks volunteering, and I was able to do that. And the interesting thing is that it was an arson, and so it was the township, the fire department was there, because it was in a township, the Columbus fire department, the state fire marshal, and the ATF, because it was an arson. So at all levels, from federal to very local, and not one person in any of those levels spoke Spanish. And so right away we knew that there was a need, and even the 911 call, when we heard it, I don't know if lives would have been saved, but it was painful to hear, because there was times when the caller, the person 911 didn't know what to do. She even says, like, who do I call? Like, valuable time being lost. Yeah. And so a family of 5 passed, right? And then 4 other people, and so everyone, and we ended up interpreting for these entities, the state and federal, right? They actually brought the ATF actually brought someone from Florida, Cubano, which is a whole different culture, right? Even the Spanish is a little bit different, but that was the best they could do at that time. They brought someone in from, and so we realized that there was a need. Not only that, but when they were, because many of those people were workers and they were trying to save, they had ladders because they were construction workers. They actually tried to stop. They tried to climb the building, and that's what you do, right? And here you don't. In the fire department, there was a rift, because the fire department was saying, no, you can't spend time stopping them, which was the right thing to do, because they could hurt themselves. But the immigrants thought that you just don't want us to help our own people. And so there was definitely cultural difference in communicating, and all of those things were pointed out. And I ended up being the chair of a Latino commission, did a kind of a study, and we did a report on that and made recommendations. And it probably took at least 7 years for the 911 call to change. I mean, that was a struggle. Yeah. And so that was that incident. And so for me, what it did for me is it was another painful identity struggle for me, because here I had come as a Chicano Latino here to a land I didn't know, and then I had become kind of known by that time, and then it just kind of brought me back, because by that time I was making all these presentations as a Latino, and people knew who I was. But I realized that there was a large number of immigrants I was aware of that I was speaking on behalf of, but never had really actually been there, right? And I wasn't fully trusted by that community, but I looked like them, right? And so, and my Spanish was different, and so I was in that space of between the mainstream and immigrant community, and I knew there were some needs, and I cry. I mean, I'm not. Crying for me is very healing, and so I remember crying, going back to driving back home, crying several times, like what is this saying? What do I do? And then shortly after that is when I started making friends and with people and getting to know them, and then the immigration struggles, fight for immigration reform came, and that was kind of the path that I took, kind of through a national organization to work on immigration reform. So that was a real turning point for me. In my identity again as a Latino in Ohio, and in Columbus, that community is still growing, right? And so, what does that mean to us today? It's there's still a lot of work to do. We still don't have spaces where people can feel safe. We talked about that earlier. Where others, there are churches, I think, but churches can only fulfill a certain amount of safety, right? Or provides that some kind of service or referral service that. It's enormous, and so I think that's the struggle that we have here in Columbus and even in Ohio, because we're not a place that people consider us to be like a large Latino population, and we're really not, right? But we're still here, and we're not the West Coast or the East Coast or the Gulf Coast or Texas, but we are here, and we've been here for a long time, and we're growing, and it's not just Mexicanos, right? It's people from different parts of ethnic backgrounds that are Hispanic or Latino, however people identify. And so it's exciting. It's exciting to see, but the task is enormous. And now I've become interested. I feel like I'm at the beginning stages of becoming an elder in the community, and so I feel that I take my work that I do serious, but I also know that to have elders in the community is important, right? Because that's really what I was looking for when I came, right? There were no elders in the community, or a community that had been established here, and now it's happening. But Latinos in Columbus are interesting because I think we are modeling the Columbus model, like we say we're in the west side, north side, but there's no real density. It's like in the mainstream culture, like German village, like really, where's German or Italian village? There's Scandinavian village, and we're kind of modeling ourselves after that, and Columbus is so widespread, and we have different needs, and so we're really living here, and we've come to work or whatever it might be, and so we don't really live in a high density of Latinos to speak of. The closest is probably the west side. Or around those grocery stores that you see. And a lot of them are still low income and probably live in poverty and work 2-3 jobs. And so that's what's happening, I think.
Can you tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing now? And I know you do many things. So if you want to share sort of the things that you do now.
Yeah, well, I started, I was hired when, 6 or before the President Obama came to office. A group of us were called to Washington, and we knew that we wanted to work on immigration reform. And we were included, I was included because Ohio, not that it was lots of Latinos, but Ohio is an important state in the political scene. And so they looked for Latino leaders in the states, and I went to Washington for a week or so and strategized with Latinos from all over the country on what we were going to be doing. And then later I was hired as State Director of Reform Immigration for America, and so we were working on immigration reform because President Obama had promised us, that's another story, right? And so we were going to hold him to that. He said, hold me to it, and we were. And so we worked on immigration reform, and that was a great struggle, and it was great organizing that happened here. But what didn't happen though was that we were concerned. We were working for policy, and then not really on the ground organizing people. Like I said before, change happens when the people themselves understand who they are and why they're here, and the struggle emerges from them, right? And so we were just at the grass top level, and didn't spend a lot of time working on the ground unless we needed people. And so once we didn't have it, and we realized here in Ohio that we needed to start raising money for that to be the emphasis. And so once the immigration and reform didn't happen, and I was no longer in that position, we stayed and we kept organizing in the community around deportations, around the DREAM Act, and some of the things that were happening nationally. That's where Maria, we actually met Maria. And so we kind of did that without an organization, because I'm not a real, sometimes systems are interesting. They could hold you back or bring you forward, right? And so we did it in a way, decentralized way. But you have to be centralized to a certain extent, right? Even if it's to get funding. And so we started a worker center about 2 years. We knew that we wanted to start a worker center, because lots of the immigrants were low-wage workers, are low-wage workers, and actually have rights as workers, even as documented. For example, we have somebody in the worker center that's actually working as a restaurant worker, mostly he wants that experience, but also he's also working to organize restaurant workers, and he's been talking and collecting some of those stories that we've shared. People who work 60, 80 hours a week with no overtime, right? And there's lots of wage theft. You know, they're not paid, but certainly are working those hours. And so in Columbus, you see all these beautiful, glossy 614 and these food magazines and these restaurants, and there's this development that's happening at the Gateway, but we don't really realize that there's people behind the scenes that are making those foods, that are cleaning those spaces, that are waiting on us, and washing the dishes, and working in the hotel rooms, and a lot of them are immigrants, and certainly low-wage people. So the Worker Center became a place where people could organize or could be represented in that case, in that situation. So we're at the early stages of that. So we do kind of wage theft work, but also represent an immigrant community, and with immigration we have a team that works on immigration, and a team that works on worker issues. And the worker issue is probably much more diverse. It's low-wage workers come in all colors, and we realize that once people, and somebody, an immigrant, one of our workers said this, and she said, once we become citizens, the injustices don't stop. They just reach another level. They're just in a different place. And so we've been organizing through the Worker Center, Central Ohio Worker Center, for the last year and a half, and that's what we're doing. And right now we're mostly doing kind of a education outreach as a way to help organize people. And so that's kind of our emphasis. We realized that that's where we needed to start. But our dream is to have a center, actually a real space where people could come and do and actually either work together or work on issues together, meet together, and certainly we would have a space where we could eat together. And so we're looking at a few places on the west side that we might be moving to soon, so we're excited about that.
Good. You mentioned a couple of times certain maybe cultural needs of or traditions, or I don't know what the right term would be, but of maybe being Latino, being Mexicano. So one of it practices like coming together to share a meal, speaking Spanish, or hearing the sounds. What did you try to keep alive in you and maybe with your children? And here in Ohio, what has been there all this time, and what has been sort of maybe difficult to maintain?
Yeah. Well, I think certainly food is first and foremost. I have in my kitchen a molcajete, which is something that goes back to indigenous times, right? And it's a stone. I'm not sure what they call it in English, mortar pestle,
Yeah.
that we use to grind our cominos and our cebolla and our ajo, or the garlic, right?
Yeah.
In order to either make salsa or to put the spices into whatever we're cooking. And so that has I've always used that. And so I don't use a blender, right? I haven't. So that's for me personally. I know lots of my sisters. She's like, you need a blender. Like, get a blender. But even the sound of the rock it takes me back to hearing when I was asleep, and I could hear my stepmother making something, and it was almost like an alarm, right? And then the smell that came with it, right? And the food. And so that if I'm talking about something physical, that's something that I see, and I go back to, and it's probably they last forever, right? Unless you lose them,
Yeah.
they don't really break. And so, so I've had that for many years, and I still use it to cook. And one time I saw my son; he was already grown up, and he moved back to Oregon, and I stayed at his place, and I heard the sound. And I go down and he's using it, and so I felt like if nothing else, then that's it, right? And so with that is the food. You know, the food is how do we maintain the food that we eat, and then the language, and then the music. You know, very arts, right? The music that we listen to. I was a musician, and so my music has changed as far as more. I still listen to mostly Latino music, but it's not so much Mexican Latino anymore, because I'm a whole different person now. I mean, I'm still who I am, but I've come to learn and appreciate different kinds of music that's in Spanish as well. And so those are the kind of thing. The other thing is that I think too is I think some kind of spirituality. People in the community who know me. And have done some work with us, and they think I've done them something, but they'll always bless me. You know, que Dios te bendiga, gracias. You know, que Dios te bendiga. To me, that's like, wow. That's I don't. It is spiritual, but it's also kind of a circle of respect, right? And I think that we can't lose that. And sometimes we forget that even with our own, right? The lack of respect. And we're all different, and we all have different ways of doing and seeing things, and then we get caught up by that which has bound us, you know, greed and money and material things, and then it's mine. This organization is mine, or I want, you know, and so we get caught up in that, and so that's kind of what I think that we have to maintain, and we're human. I'm human. You know, I make mistakes as well, but. How can part of my work, and I'm intentional about this, even if it's just sitting still and listening. I have to balance. I have to come back to that, and that's what I want from my children. And when I say my children, my immediate children, but also my familia, for you, and for other people, and I think that people respond to that. And that's not just Latino, I mean, that's just the way we are, I think. But in our culture, the familia and the connection and helping each other, respeto, right? When I was a child, we'd introduce ourselves and we'd say, Rubén Herrera para servirle. Here to serve you, right? And that doesn't mean that I'm subservient, or it could, you know, some of those things get messed up, right? But it means that I'm here para servirle, to serve.
A sus órdenes.
A la orden.
Yeah.
That's
really
beautiful.
Good.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about that. It's not something. You described probably one, maybe not personally, but at the same time, as I get to know you more, it probably was personal. I was going to ask about one of the most difficult times of you being here, and you mentioned sort of the fire. Is there another one?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to throw something else out there, because as I came out as a gay Latino male, probably, I don't know, at least 15 years ago or so. But I mean, by that time I was married, right, and I had already was living this life, and I don't have regrets about my children or my marriage, or it was a beautiful moment, and a very something that who I was, and I honored that. But I realized that there was something else, and so as a community leader, as I was, I have it's a difficult thing to say because I think we're all leaders, and I don't adhere to the leader model, where we have to have somebody save us, the leader or villain, that's bad person.
Yeah.
That to me that's not the way to move forward. But I was known in the community, and I decided that I would come out to my community, or be openly out, and what I found, interestingly enough, was back to my previous conversation, is if you really authentically lay the groundwork of being a good person, as you are, and you've created those relationships with people, I think especially within our culture, we'll accept you. Maybe not understand, but we'll accept you as you are. And that was exactly the case that happened with me. Is that people? I had friends that were friends, and people that we had mutual respect for, and people loved me as I am. And if they didn't tell me, right? And so coming, and then that was more difficult for me, just like any coming out process is for anyone. But the difficult thing for me is, okay, so what is my responsibility as a out Latino male now? Because we know if roughly the queer population is, in general, is maybe 20% of everyone. If there's 50,000 immigrants, how many queer people are that, right? And so what's my responsibility? And so I think about that, and I am who I am, and sometimes I go with my partner at different places, and people know. But something very interesting happened. I was asked to be on a radio show, internet radio that just started in the West Side, and this woman probably, with social media and people just know about your lives, right? Yeah. She was going to interview me about some of the work that I was doing, but she started off with a segment that she said, it was in Spanish, and she said, today is in Mexico, it's I don't know, I forgot what she called it, but it was like a gay awareness day in Mexico, and that's where she started. Dime eso, ¿qué tú piensas eso, right? And then that was her way of kind of making it okay with who I was, and we spent the first segment probably 15 minutes talking about, and I said that I came out in that program, and she let us she expressed her views as far as that we're human, and we need to accept, and that's something that we have to work on, and so surprisingly we spent 15 minutes talking about that, and so that was very beautiful, I thought, and so I have a responsibility, but it's still difficult at times, I think, because in the mainstream community it's difficult, right? And as queer people of color, our needs are not gay marriage right now, right? And so ours is just being accepted, maybe, and so there's that difference, but all in all, I think that.
It sounds like it was a difficult experience, but at the same time, you saw a lot of good, and you're seeing a lot of good through that.
Absolutely.
The response that you received, I guess.
Yeah, I think that because we're back to what I said earlier. La familia is important, and whether our familias are our blood family or politico, as they say, and so that's what's going to get us through, right? And we're talking about people that have that we've all struggled. I've shared my struggle, right? Just of identity coming, but I can't imagine coming here, crossing the border with children or without your children, or leaving your children. Whatever it might be. That story, like wow, that's and then working and coming to Ohio. So those things are kind of still happening differently here.
What does Ohio mean to you?
Ohio is. I've lived here most of my life, and so it is my home. And so first and foremost, it's home. And so how do I make it my home every day, and for myself and for my community? In Ohio is I think in the Midwest people are generally friendly, but also it's also can be racist as well, and so. I guess the short answer would be it's home. It's a place that's changing all the time, and it's unique. It's not the West Coast or the East Coast or anywhere else. So I think that's probably it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Kevin.